How much that is, I'm not really sure about that. I don't think anybody can actually quantify that. I need 100 extra calories because I'm on Primobolan. No. Vigorous PEDs, Coach Steve, Primobolan Shark Week. Let's continue and move on to how Primobolan affects overall hematocrit levels and affects red blood cell production. So I'm going to jump straight to the conclusion here. I went over all of my blood work, all of my clients' blood work, and the results are kind of all over the place. So personally, I've run anywhere between 200 milligrams of Primobolan per week and 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan per week. And I've had cases where my hematocrit is higher on 200 to 500 milligrams of Primobolan compared to what it is on 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan. And I see the same thing with my clients. So what I'm assuming, or the conclusion that I'm going to draw, is that in the same sense that Primobolan increases white blood cell count and promotes the production of T lymphocytes in cases where the immune system is attacked by HIV, for example, HIV positive, or another autoimmune disease where the immune system is impaired. In those cases, Primobolan was shown to raise white blood cell count and T lymphocyte concentration, sustaining or raising the overall immune system to somewhat sufficient levels. And I feel it's the same with Primobolan regarding red blood cell production, because it's of course prescribed in cases of anemia due to bone marrow failure. So in those medical conditions, Primobolan might raise, or it has been shown to raise, white blood cell count and red blood cell count and hematocrit levels. So it would restore it in case of a deficiency. Again, anemia is a deficiency. And of course, when your immune system is impaired due to an autoimmune disease, you have a white blood cell count deficiency. So if you're not suffering from one of these medical conditions and you don't have a deficiency in white blood cells or red blood cells, I don't feel that Primobolan is going to raise hematocrit levels or red blood cell count dramatically if you're not suffering from a medical condition. Keep in mind that when you're taking Primobolan, most cases you're also taking testosterone. So you can look at it this way. In that step-by-step video that I did about figuring out your minimal effective dose of testosterone and your maximum dose of testosterone, if you notice that your hematocrit levels went up or your overall red blood cell count went up to alarming levels, forcing you to donate monthly or bi-monthly or every 3 months or go for a therapeutic phlebotomy because your hematocrit levels and red blood cell count is too high, if you already experienced that with testosterone, then I can almost guarantee you that Primobolan or Boldenone or Trenbolone, for example, is going to exacerbate that. So if that's already a side effect that's occurring on testosterone, increased hematocrit, increased blood cell count, Primobolan is going to take that to the next level and you'll have to donate a lot more frequently. Now, if that's not the case, like in my case, that's not the case, my hematocrit usually fluctuates between 46% to, let's say, 50 on testosterone only. And I've had it as high as 52% on testosterone. That was 2,000 milligrams of testosterone. So that's generally not the norm. Most people don't run their testosterone levels that high. They would prefer to have maybe a foundation of 750 to 1,000 milligrams of testosterone and then another anabolic on top. For example, Primobolan at the same amount, 750 to 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan. We'll discuss that in the dosing video a little bit more in detail. So if you already experienced elevated hematocrit or red blood cell count on testosterone only, from everything that I've seen, Primobolan is going to raise that. So in those cases, Primobolan might not be suitable because you need to donate more frequently or do more therapeutic phlebotomies. And it highly depends on your medical system if that's even a possibility. Like for me, for example, I can't donate here because the Thai Cross has got a laundry list of prerequisites before you can even donate there. And even when you meet all those prerequisites and you qualify on paper, somehow you're still not allowed to donate. And I don't really understand why, even though I have a little bit of a hunch, but that would force me to pull the racist card, which I won't do because I try to keep it positive here on the VigorousSteve YouTube channel. So let's move on to therapeutic phlebotomies. I can do those at several of the private clinics here. It's relatively easy. You walk in, you ask for a doctor, you show your blood work results, or you tell them you suspect you have high hematocrit levels because you feel winded, lack of energy. You would expect to have a lot of energy and a lot of stamina when your hematocrit and red blood cell count is too high. But again, when your hematocrit is so high and the percentage of your blood is mostly cells, it forces more pressure on your heart to pump this sludge around. It's no longer a liquid, it's a sludge. And that occurs above like 55% or 60% hematocrit, where your blood is so thick with red blood cells that it puts a lot of strain on your heart, forcing it to pump this super thick blood around the body. So in those cases, you usually feel a little bit winded and lack of energy. Could be caused by a million different things. So if you feel winded and have lack of energy, it doesn't mean that your hematocrit levels are high. Go do your blood work, please. Okay, so in those cases, if my blood work showed that my hematocrit levels are high, I would be able to go to the doctor and get a therapeutic phlebotomy or use my private rogue nurse to do a therapeutic phlebotomy for me at home. When I look at all my clients, on dosages ranging between 300 milligrams of Primobolan per week to 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan per week, the hematocrit levels and the red blood cell count, again, is all over the place. Some guys have a high hematocrit of 56%, and they need to donate frequently, maybe every 2 months. So red blood cells, for example, have an active life of 100 to 120 days. I believe that the bone marrow produces 2.4 million red blood cells per second. And when you look at the overall cells of your body, red blood cells are actually 86% or 85% of your overall cells that are within your body. So there's a lot of red blood cells going on. And if you don't have anemia and you're taking Primobolan, this might get accelerated. Now, the highest hematocrit that I've seen on clients' blood work is 56. And I instruct them to get a therapeutic phlebotomy or do a blood donation. When you do a therapeutic phlebotomy or go for a blood donation, hematocrit usually drops by around 3%. So if it's 56 before doing the donation, it will be around 53% after the donation. Now, some blood work ranges 53% on your hematocrit is still too high, so you would need a consecutive donation or therapeutic phlebotomy to get your hematocrit back into range. But for overall bodybuilding purposes, I feel that between 50 to 53, maybe even 54%, again, depends on the elevation that you live in. Depending on the elevation, up to 54%, I feel that it's relatively safe. Now, if you see somewhere 57, 60% or over 60%, it's time to do several therapeutic phlebotomies or several donations and get that all under control, because you don't want your blood to end up like sludge. You want that liquid so it doesn't put too much strain on your heart, pumping all these red blood cells and plasma around, making you feel winded and tired and lethargic. Yeah? So keep that in mind. You'll drop about 3% on average from a pint of blood donation or therapeutic phlebotomy, which is discarded, unfortunately. But hey, if you're running something like Accutane, for example, like I was in the past, or you're running steroids, or any other compound that you're on in your performance-enhancing drug protocol, that all ends up in the plasma as well. So I will always tell my clients, if you can't do a therapeutic phlebotomy and get your hematocrit under control, do a power red donation. So that's a donation where they only take the red blood cells and they return the plasma. Now, because Primobolan might promote the formation of red blood cells and increase hematocrit levels, the metabolism and recruitment of iron, vitamin B9, folic acid, folate, or vitamin B12, cobalamin is significantly sped up when Primobolan is increasing overall hematocrit and red blood cell production. So if that's not the case on testosterone, I don't feel that Primobolan is going to increase hematocrit levels dramatically or increase red blood cell count dramatically. But if it did on testosterone and you're adding Primobolan on top, I'm sure the metabolism of iron, B9, and B12 will be sped up. So if you're forced to do more frequent donations, I would prefer to go with a power red donation, because it actually returns some of the plasma, which contains serum iron, transferrin, and ferritin, which are used as storage for iron to produce additional red blood cells. Iron goes into the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin attracts oxygen. It's all contained within the red blood cell. And red blood cells transport this hemoglobin, iron, and oxygen around the body to oxygenate the cells and promote the production of ATP, because you still need to oxidize carbohydrates with oxygen to form energy. Yeah, that's the last step of this whole process of oxygenation. So with a power red donation, you'll see that the overall iron content of your body doesn't deplete as much as would otherwise be occurring with a therapeutic phlebotomy or a regular donation. And because Primobolan keeps promoting the production of red blood cells, if you're basically depleting it this way, you're promoting red blood cell production, it contains iron, you're donating that or removing that with a therapeutic phlebotomy, and your iron content of the body goes down and down and down and down and down. At one point, you're iron deficient. So it doesn't happen with a power red donation because it returns some of the iron, besides the iron that's contained within the red blood cells, whatever is in serum or the ferritin, that it still returns. So you see that the depletion is a lot less. And if you have to do frequent donations through power red, you should be able to sustain your serum iron levels and your ferritin levels and your transferrin levels somewhere in the middle of the range. So now your hematocrit should stay within range with frequent donations using the power red method. Your total red blood cell count won't go too high, and your mean corpulus volume, your mean corpulus hemoglobin, and the shape of your red blood cells won't get skewed. That only happens in a nutrient deficiency. So the nutrients that are used are iron, vitamin B9, and vitamin B12. And if you're missing any one of these, or all three, or a combination, how your body produces red blood cells is going to be skewed. So in case you get an iron deficiency because you're donating so frequently that you're actually removing the iron content within your body, or you're simply not eating enough beef because you're a vegan and you're not supplementing with a iron, ferrous, bisglycinate formula to supplement the amount of iron that you would otherwise miss from dietary sources. Again, if you're eating beef frequently, it shouldn't be an issue. And if you're not donating frequently, it shouldn't be an issue either. But if you're not eating beef and you're donating frequently, and you're on Primobolan producing a lot of red blood cells and raising your hematocrit, forcing you to do frequent donations, serum iron will deplete. The size of the red blood cell actually increases because it needs to increase its oxygen carrying capacity. So now you have a high hematocrit, but you might have a normal or even low normal complete blood count because the size are bigger, increasing its effect on the hematocrit percentage in relation to everything else that's in the plasma. Because the size of the red blood cell is bigger, your hematocrit is higher, even though your complete blood count might still be in the normal reference range, forcing you to donate, depleting serum iron levels even further. So if you are susceptible to erythropoietic activity from anabolic androgenic steroids, whether that's testosterone, primobolan, boldenone, or trenbolone, you have to pay extra careful attention to your nutrition. You'll be forced to donate or do therapeutic phlebotomies or power red donation frequently anyway, because your hematocrit will rise. So it's almost a given that you need to take care of it somehow at one point in time. But because you're depleting your serum iron concentrations in cases of a therapeutic phlebotomy, or you can't do a power red donation, if you're not on top of your serum iron, you will completely skew your mean corpulus volume, mean corpulus hemoglobin, and the overall shape of your red blood cells because you're creating a deficiency through donation. And this makes erythropoietic, anabolic, androgenic steroids a little bit of a double-edged sword because it does promote red blood cell production and increases hematocrit levels. Now you're forced to pay extra attention to your nutrition because you're going to donate at one point anyway. But now you're providing all the building blocks for the maximum amount of hematocrit and the maximum amount of red blood cells that these erythropoietic compounds can stimulate. So now you're actually accelerating the amount of red blood cell production that occurs within your body. So let's say you go from 2.4 million cells to 2.8 million cells per second, as an example. Depleting all these nutrients or requiring a surplus of nutrients to facilitate the amount of additional red blood cells that are being produced in the bone marrow. Yes, your caloric requirement might go up slightly as well. Again, making red blood cells is a labor-intensive process that should require calories besides iron, vitamin B9, or vitamin B12. How much that is, I'm not really sure about that. I don't think anybody can actually quantify that. I need 100 extra calories because I'm on Primobolan. No. So I feel that it's very important for you to assess how your body responds to testosterone by itself regarding overall hematocrit percentage and the changes in red blood cell production. You do your blood work before, during, and after, and again, before you decide to add in Primobolan. So if you notice that hematocrit is already changing on your effective dose of testosterone and it's getting worse on your maximum tolerable dose of testosterone, Primobolan is going to exacerbate that. And you need to look in your surroundings where you can do frequent donations, preferably power red donations. And if you're going with a therapeutic phlebotomy or a regular donation, you make sure you're on top of your iron intake, your vitamin B9 intake, and your vitamin B12 intake, because that is going to get depleted. Now, the same counts for any other erythropoietic compound, whether that's anadrol, boldenone, trenbolone, or whatever you respond to, or a high dose of testosterone. Keep all these things into consideration. And then on the opposite side, the least effective dose of testosterone doesn't change hematocrit and red blood cell count whatsoever, and your maximum tolerable dose of testosterone increases hematocrit marginally, let's say to 48%, 50%, adding Primobolan on top in a 1-to-1 ratio should be, in my opinion, and what I see with most of my clients, should be completely safe and shouldn't skew or alter your hematocrit levels to the point you need to do frequent donations. You might have to do a donation at one point, especially if you're going on a high dose, 1,000 milligrams of test and 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan. Your hematocrit was, let's say, 50%, for example, on 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, and adding 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan on top, hopefully over the period of several adjustments, not going from 1,000 milligrams to 2,000 milligrams combined anabolics. Take it slow, take it easy. Yeah, anabolism doesn't happen overnight. You don't need to double the dose from one day to the other. Please do it. It is a step-by-step process, just like I explained in the testosterone video. Again, guys, I have to save you from yourself sometimes. And again, before I lose track, 1,000 milligrams of testosterone per week increased your hematocrit to, let's say, 50%, and adding 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan on top over the course of several weeks or months raise your hematocrit to 54%. You should be able to donate at 54%. Restoring your hematocrit to a comparable level at your maximum dose of testosterone. So before we close off this subject, I'll use a couple examples of my clients that I've seen over the years. I've had one client run 700 milligrams of testosterone, 700 milligrams of boldenone, and 700 milligrams of Primobolan. That was his preference for the off season, so that's 2,100 milligrams of erythropoietic or potential erythropoietic compounds combined. Yes, they're all legit, accurately dosed, as expected. His hematocrit, the maximum, went up to 55%. I told him to donate. So he only had to donate once on this cocktail about 2 months into this cycle. And then 2 months later, his hematocrit ended up at, I believe it was like 51%. So it didn't really budge much. After he donated, it didn't increase any further. So this is just a single case study where I was controlling all the variables, making sure his nutrition and micronutrient intake was in place. We knew exactly what he was taking, but it's still only anecdotal evidence. And we can take a different scenario with the same client. Maybe 9 months later, he did another off-season cycle. So he took a little break in a while, went on a cruise, detox, did his blood work. Everything came back into range and he was ready for another off-season cycle. Ended up in a step-by-step process. 1,000 milligrams of test and 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan. And the same client that had to donate before on comparable amounts of anabolics combined, even though he wasn't on boldenone the second time, his hematocrit ended up at 52%. I believe that the second off-season cycle containing Primobolan was about 6 months in duration. So we built up the dose. The first 2 months was about 500 milligrams testosterone per week and 500 milligrams Primobolan per week. Then the third and the fourth month was 750 milligrams of test per week, 750 milligrams Primo per week. And the last 2 months, month 5 and 6, 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan, hematocrit ending up around 52%, not requiring a donation. So There's two different scenarios. The inclusion of boldenone in this particular individual required one donation, and the exclusion of boldenone, even though Primobolan is touted as an erythropoietic compound, didn't require him to do a donation. Now, on the opposite side, I've had several clients that run comparable dosages, so let's say 500 tests, 500 Primo per week, and they would have to do donations every 2 months. And increasing the dose to 750 milligrams of testosterone and 750 milligrams of Primobolan forced them to donate every 6 weeks. Every 6 weeks. So it really depends on your individual response and how Primobolan or testosterone or any other erythropoietic compound is going to affect your overall hematocrit and overall red blood cell production. And with one client, it got so bad when he was running 750 milligrams of testosterone and 750 milligrams of Primobolan. His hematocrit ended up 56%. You do a donation. 6 weeks later, it's back at 56% again, having to do another donation and another donation. He was just fighting with the donations to keep his hematocrit somewhat under control. So I told him, listen, we're going to discontinue the Primobolan. We're going to reduce the testosterone because he already had moderately elevated hematocrit levels on testosterone only, but he wanted to add Primobolan on top, even though I advised against it in the beginning because of the hematocrit issues. And I told him, listen, if you add in the Primobolan, you're going to be donating frequently, way more frequently than you want. So we increase his iron intake, his vitamin B9 and B12 intake to make sure he doesn't get skewed readings on his mean corpus volume, mean corpus hemoglobin, or change the size or shape of his red blood cells through a nutrient deficiency. Ended up donating every 6 weeks, and I had to take him off Primobolan, reduce the testosterone, and finish off his off-season on nandrolone, which gave him different side effects for obvious reasons, because testosterone and nandrolone is a very potent combination for estradiol production, water retention, etc. So that pretty much brings us to the end and the conclusion of this video. Do your freaking blood work so you know how testosterone is affecting your hematocrit and red blood cells before you add in Primobolan, which could potentially raise them further compared to testosterone. And if testosterone doesn't really raise your hematocrit levels, like in my case, and the case of some of my clients, I doubt that Primobolan is going to skew it or raise it or force you to do frequent donations. But if it is the case with testosterone and you need to donate on testosterone only already, Primobolan, you're going to donate a little bit more frequently. Even if you replace milligram for milligram, so let's say you're on 750 milligrams of testosterone, and you replace that with 375 milligrams test, 375 milligrams Primobolan, we add the Primobolan on top in cases of elevated hematocrit levels already from the 750 milligrams of testosterone. That combination in a 1-to-1 ratio, that combination will raise hematocrit levels further. So on a milligram for milligram basis, the conclusion I can draw from all of my clients' blood work results that saw their hematocrit levels increased. Primobolan is more potent than testosterone. But if you add it on top and your testosterone didn't change your hematocrit levels, I don't think that hematocrit is going to change alarmingly. So that's my case, some of my clients, but not all of my clients, and probably might not be the case for you on this other side of this YouTube channel watching right now. Before you see alarming hematocrit levels or alarming red blood cell count, blood work every 2 months before you make adjustments to your PED protocol, whether that contains testosterone or Primobolan or not, going forward. In the next Primobolan Shark Week video, we'll go over estradiol, lipids, and sex hormone binding globulin concentrations and see how Primobolan affects that in comparison to other compounds like masterone, proviron, dihydroboldenone. Yeah, we'll go over everything so you can assess how Primobolan affects those blood work markers. And then, yes, then we'll finally get into dosing. Don't worry, we'll just save the best for last. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next Primobolan Shark Week video.